The Migration Summit 2022 is organized by the MIT Refugee Action Hub, REACT, NAMAL, Karam Foundation, Paper Airplanes, and the MIT Abdul Latif Jameel World Education Lab. It is a month-long global convening designed to build bridges between diverse communities of displaced learners, universities, companies, NGOs, policy makers, and other stakeholders around key challenges and opportunities for refugee and migrant communities. This year's theme is exploring the education and workforce development and displacement through virtual events hosted by participating partners around the world. My name is Dr. Lana Cook, Assistant Director of Strategic Initiatives at MIT Open Learning and from MIT REACT. And I'm delighted to introduce today's panel discussion on entrepreneurship education for refugee and migrant communities. This conversation will focus on best practices for building entrepreneurship education programs and opening pathways for refugee and migrant entrepreneurs and self-employment opportunities, featuring programs from Uganda and Kenya and around the world. I'm so pleased to introduce my colleague, Erdin Beshimov, Senior Director at MIT Bootcamps, who will lead today's conversation. Over to you, Erdin.
Thank you, Lana. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Considering that this is an international group, we're from all over the world. I should say good morning, good afternoon, good night. It's great to have you here. I'm Erdin Beshimov. As Lana said, I'm the founder of MIT Bootcamps. We are an educational program at MIT for global entrepreneurs. And we've run a number of boot camps for refugees in partnership with Lana's program, MIT REACT. And they have been some of the most meaningful boot camps for me personally. Boot camps through which I came to believe in the mission of entrepreneurship education for refugees. It's also personally meaningful for me to be here because my parents came to the United States from Kyrgyzstan as refugees. And along the way, our family has gotten a ton of help from a lot of good willing people who came forward and out of the goodness of their hearts provided real support. And so I believe many more people like me need support of this kind. And I believe that refugees, when given the opportunity, can make the world a better place. And I think we all share this belief. Now, the critical question for us is, how do we make sure that we do not spin wheels? Our challenge is grand. The refugee problem is not getting any easier. At the same time, this is a resource scarce work environment for us. How can we sustain our mission, continue believing, making impact despite the challenges that we have? This is really the question for us all. And so to begin discussing this question, I would like to welcome our panel. What I will do, I will call them to the stage. They will introduce themselves. We'll first go through the introduction and let's then get into the really nitty-gritty questions. First, I would like to call to the stage Amani Joel. Amani?
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity given. My name is Joel Amani Mafigi. I am originally from the Democratic Republic of Congo, but currently living in Uganda for the last 14 years. Yeah, I co-found an organization, a refugee-led organization called Unleashed Potentials in Motion, where we empower youth, refugees, and marginalized youth in the host community through social entrepreneurship, business development, as well as leadership. So we have a linear structure that supports social entrepreneurs to develop their own ideas from scratch. These ideas are incubated. After the incubation period, they are given an opportunity to undergo professionalization so that they can in turn become social enterprises that support the community. The idea here is to support refugees create jobs for themselves as well as creating jobs for the host community. We have been doing this work for the last 5 years, since 2018. And so far we have given out at our organization over 137 scholarships and 29 social enterprises have evolved. And we as well have got 67 jobs created. So this is a great milestone that we have achieved in the last time. And allow me share a story of one of our social enterprises, one of our scholars called the Pasia Baraka. So Pasia Baraka came from the Democratic Republic of Congo. He fled war and persecution from DRC, where he was living. And he had long a dream of becoming a doctor, but he could not manage because he left his country. He dropped out of education. When he reached in Uganda, he wanted to continue school. Unfortunately, this was not possible because he was dropped in a downer class compared to the class he had been in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Pasia was discouraged and he left school. So after a while, Pasia got in touch with some friends who had already who had applied at Unleashed. He also enrolled, he applied, and luckily enough, he was accepted at the organization to take on social entrepreneurship, business development courses. So after 2 years, Pasia was able to come up with a social enterprise called Botanical Repellent, which is producing a mosquito repellent jelly to combat against the malaria for refugees in Nakivale. Pasia has been able to employ 10 employees, and he has registered his organization, and he has also been approved by National Drug Authority in Uganda. So he's making a living and also supporting other refugees make a living. This is the same situation with the other 29 social enterprises that are here. Yeah, so that is a brief about our organization. Thank you very much for giving me the audience.
Amani, thank you. And I personally appreciate the story of one of your students. This is fantastic. It's great to have you here. We also have two representatives from the International Rescue Committee. And it's fantastic because we'll deepen our knowledge of their work this way. So first, I want to call to the stage Kim Behrman.
Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. Great to be with you today. My name is Kim Behrman. I'm a technical advisor at the IRC, and I sit in our economic recovery and development team. So my focus is enterprise development and employment, particularly for East Africa, although I'm joining you today from New York. I'm going to share my screen so my colleague Belinda and I can share just a couple of slides with you. Okay, I just want to talk a little bit about IRC's approach to refugee entrepreneurship and how we support both refugees and host communities in securing livelihoods, whether that's through employment or self-employment. IRC uses an approach that we call bundled services, and I want to break that down a little bit today. So we know that livelihood support, evidence has shown that livelihood support is more effective when we combine a suite of holistic programming rather than just one type of training, for example. So we're looking at providing services in 29 countries where we're doing economic programming, things that include a combination of skills building, access to capital in the form of business grants, social capital and mentorship, as well as support from the wider enabling environment. So making sure refugees have access to legal support and information about labor markets, as well as referrals to protection or health or gender-based violence services, anything else that sort of supports their emotional well-being in addition to their livelihoods goals. So we look at the way, like the combination of these suite of services, but also in unique ways of delivering them. And so our approach is to use a combination of classroom-based training, one-on-one mentorship, digital skills and e-learning, as well as, of course, not only delivery directly from IRC, but working very closely with refugee-led organizations and other local partners. The ultimate goal, as you see on the right, is that clients will get a customized bundle of services that's, specific to them based on their needs, their education, their interest, and also the market opportunities. So we see IRC as a facilitator between a client and the labor market. When it comes specifically to microenterprise, this is a huge part of IRC's work, as well as our research, which my colleague Belinda will talk a little bit about. But we're trying to create a bundle of services for microenterprise that tackles the various challenges that refugees and other host community members face. So that's, we know they have difficulty accessing capital. We know that specific entrepreneurship skills are challenging, as well as business networks and finding community that you can depend on, not only financially, but also for experience in the private sector. Ongoing access to finance, of course, is another big component. So our micro enterprise bundle is really focused on a combination of skills building, capital in the form of a business grant, as well as linkages to both informal financial services like a Village Savings and Loans Association, or more formally with banks, coupled with mentorship as well. And IRC has come up with this general approach based on what we know the limited evidence shows, but we're also really committed to doing research to better understand what is the right combination of a microenterprise bundle in order to provide the most cost-effective and impactful services for clients. So I'll pause there and turn over to my colleague Belinda to introduce herself.
Thank you, Kim. Belinda, welcome.
Thank you so much, Erdin, and Kim as well. So my name is Belinda Moore, and I'm the Deputy Director for the Rebuild Project, which is being undertaken by IRC. So I work very closely with Kim and other partners and colleagues to deliver innovative solutions around livelihoods. And Rebuild in itself is a very ambitious project that's looking to serve 20,000 refugees and host community members in Kampala and in Nairobi. And it is very multifaceted, working in direct service delivery, advocacy, and research as well. So very happy for me to share more information. Maybe in the chat later, Kim, we can pop the fact sheet. But for this particular session today, we wanted to zoom in straight into our entrepreneurship support program and really building on what Kim has spoken about. Kim, we can go to the next slide. So zooming really into our microenterprise work currently, and building on the challenges that Kim has mentioned, capital, business knowledge or education, and social context. So we are looking to continue to deliver services at the same time, build the body of knowledge around what really works when it comes to refugee entrepreneurship support, as well as the host communities that they live in. And we are looking to run a research program that looks at two particular things, in addition to the direct services that we're delivering. So we're looking to answer what really works, so effectiveness towards microenterprise outcomes for refugees and their host communities, and then what really works around social aspects, because Kim mentioned that social cohesion, social aspects around connection, linkages, who do you know, discrimination are actually a big factor on whether businesses succeed or not. And we've come together with various partners from really great organizations to really support us walk through the research journey, from the Center of Global Development, from the Economic Policy Research Center in Uganda, Georgetown University, Princeton University, and Rochester University, just to try and answer these particular questions through a randomized controlled trial. And the focus is looking at cash and how it can be complemented by mentorship. And I want to really talk about how mentorship itself can be education for refugees in entrepreneurship. Kim, you can move to the next slide. So zooming into really the components that we are putting together for our micro enterprise support program right now is looking at, one, we know that we have cash, and cash is meant to look to unblock or unlock challenges around capital, access to capital, to either start a business or expand that business. But in addition to that, we are looking at the mentorship aspect that Kim spoke about to see if it can actually contribute to richer learning by refugees and their host communities. So here we are looking at whether mentorship in itself can have layered or varied types of impacts on the businesses that our participants or our clients start. Can it be a form of business technical knowledge gaining, where we can, from one person to the other, they can pass on technical knowledge outside the realm of a classroom? And then on the same note, can it now be layered to address all the other social concerns that we mentioned, whether it's being linkages? Can I, as a national, be able to share linkages around where I get my supplies, where I actually go and get, how to get customers, where to go and get better business connections and deals? Can that be brought in by the mentorship aspect? So you're bringing in a different types of ingredients, if I can call them that, in the mentorship pieces. So we are trying to test out cross-gender mentorship programs where we bring different people of different genders, but also bringing host community members and refugees in mentorship engagements to see if that can actually enrich the learning outside a classroom and outside formal learning that can be provided through training with a very fixed curriculum in what has been known to be the usual classroom setting. Part of the other things that we're looking to test is if actually when we bring refugees and the host communities in a natural setting where they talk to each other within their business premises, meeting socially, if that can actually break the challenges around, that are usually exacerbated by the lack of understanding each other, shared perspective, shared vision, and to see if that actually brings out future learning. So this is in a nutshell, and we do want to leave a lot of time to talk about this later, so I'll stop there and really keen to hear questions around this. Just wanted to mention that this is research that we're just starting right now, and happy to go on that journey with the rest of the team here and be able to come back and share more about what you're learning later on. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you, Belinda and Kim. Down the line, I will ask you a question about the scalability of such services. The concept of bundled customized services is fascinating, and I just wonder, well, how do you scale it up? But let's proceed with our introductions. We've had some connections issues with Simon, but Simon, may I call you to the stage? Hopefully you're able to join. Simon. Let's see. And folks in the audience, thank you for your patience. We're trying not to give up. At any rate, Simon, I will give you time to persist with connecting. So just send me a message if you can, if you're able to join with your mic on, and I'll ask you to introduce whenever you can. Okay. So we also have two representatives from MIT, from the MIT Dlab program, Amy Smith and Martha Thompson. So Amy, can I please ask you to join us and introduce yourself?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you so much, Erdin, and thank you to everyone who is on the call. It's great to see so many participants here. So my name is Amy Smith, and I'm the founding director of MIT Dlab. Our mission is to develop practical solutions and collaborative approaches to address global poverty challenges. And we do this through academics, through field work, and through research. In particular, the work that we do with refugees and migrant populations is around entrepreneurship, is in a similar way to what you just heard about from the IRC, is creating innovation ecosystems that enable people to identify challenges, create solutions, and then create livelihoods and businesses around those solutions. So these ecosystems include trainings with a design focus, where people learn the design process, they understand how to identify challenges, frame those challenges, generate ideas around solutions, build prototypes, and then refine those prototypes. Following that, we provide mentorship, we provide access to tools and materials through innovation centers, which are maker spaces which are staffed by project project staff as well. And so their participants are able to continue moving forward with their project and iterating on it. And then finally, the other component that we bring to this ecosystem is this idea of co-creation between refugees, host community members, and humanitarian organizations, both local and international. And we provide these co-creation summits where these actors can come together and explore additional livelihood opportunities, to explore entrepreneurship, and to look at how could they expand the impact of the technologies that were developed through this basic training. We're currently doing this work in several areas. The most in-depth work that we're doing is in northern Uganda, in West Nile, working in collaboration with Kulika Uganda and YSAT, which is the Youth Social Advocacy Team, which is a refugee-led organization in Rhino Camp. And we're doing projects that are funded by GIZ and Malteser. And then also in South Sudan, we're doing a project funded by USAID. Martha will talk a little bit about that, that project in South Sudan, but I thought it might be nice just to show you some pictures of what we mean by the livelihood technologies that people are creating. So I will share my slides right now. If you just give me a brief moment. Yeah, let me get this into presentation mode. Okay. So this is a little bit of the way that a technology would evolve. Participants or refugees would make an initial prototype during the design training, and then they would have a chance to continue working at the Innovation Center to refine that prototype, improve its functionality, and then they would go through entrepreneurship training and develop a final prototype, which is sort of market ready, where they've identified what is the right market segmentation, what is the right approach. Should they be looking at selling the product or selling the service of the product? More recently, just last month, in fact, we ran a co-creation summit, as I mentioned, with refugees, host community populations, and NGO workers to again expand the technologies that were started during these basic trainings. So this is a picture of a groundnut roaster, which was developed and refined through the co-creation summit. These are pictures from our final showcase, which is why people look a little more formal and less like they're in a workshop. This is a washing machine that is used to help save labor of women in the settlements. And this one focuses particularly on making the scrubbing easier. This is an oven, which would be used for community baking enterprises and to promote income that way. And this is a wheel cart, which can be used to move heavy loads around the camp. When it's not moving people, it can be used to move, for example, when people are collecting their rations and needing to transport those to their homes. And so we were particularly working with WFP to think about, instead of, for example, hiring external or buying vehicles, could they work with these refugee organizations to produce these wheel carts to both build the capacity of the entrepreneurs and to support their businesses, while also making it easier for people to collect their rations. So those are just a few pictures of what we're doing in Uganda. We could go on, but we don't have time for that. So I'm just going to hand it quickly over to my colleague, Martha, who'll talk a little bit about the work that we're doing in South Sudan, which builds off the work that we've done so far in Uganda.
Thank you. And Martha, welcome.
Martha, make sure you unmute.
Years I still haven't learned that. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. My name is Martha Thompson. I'm a humanitarian worker who now works at Dlab as Humanitarian Innovation Specialist with Amy. Amy gave an overview of our work in Uganda, and in South Sudan, we're trying to adapt that model to working with displaced in two areas, Duke and Pibor in Jonglei province. And of course, it's quite a different situation. There's quite a bit of active conflict in the area. It's quite low resource. But we find that working with people there, doing this design training with the displaced there is very important in terms of how it can change people's mindsets, moving people from dependency to agency. And this is something we really are trying to reinforce in all our work. The design process is really a problem-solving process. How can people learn to identify problems that they want to prioritize and build something to solve that problem. As they get feedback, they learn to refine it. And we're finding in our research that this builds both problem solving, resilience, teamwork in people, and that these skills are very important within the entrepreneurship training. And by having an innovation center where people can go to and continue to refine their prototypes, we find that that reinforces the design training and the problem solving. So what we're hoping is that this, by emphasizing the design approach, people are able not only to build the technology, but apply those skills to other parts of their lives. In a place like Pibor and Duke, where there is a great need for services, we find that having people define the area they want to work with and choosing the service that they think solves the problem is a very important first step. We also hope that by bringing different generations together in Pibor, where there's a lot of intergenerational conflict, the design training and the innovation center can serve as neutral spaces that provide the possibility of reduction of conflict. So just in the interest of time, I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Martha and everyone, thank you. I think we accomplished one of the most important implicit goals of this exercise together, which is to show to everyone here that there are a lot of people doing important work, and often separately from each other. Often perhaps we can feel in isolation, but this is part of making change, knowing that we are not alone. So this is very exciting. Thank you for these introductions. What I'm going to begin doing now, I will ask a number of pointed questions to some members of the panel based on the introductions. But if other members of the panel would also like to address those questions, please let me know, step in, would be delighted to hear that. Yeah, so with this in mind, let's proceed. Let me ask this somewhat cynical and perhaps the 800-pound gorilla question to Amani and to Martha. What I've heard in relation to my work about boot camps for refugees is the following, that, hey, refugees have a lot of problems: food security, physical security, psychological trauma. Teaching them entrepreneurship or teaching them mindsets, as you, Martha, said, to go from dependency to agency just seems a little frivolous. I personally don't agree with that question, but I'd like you to address it. So let's go with you, Amani, first. It seems a bit frivolous to do entrepreneurship education for refugees. Aren't you building false hope? Amani, yeah, there you go.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that question. Actually, since 2018, when we began, of course, we have surely changed our model several times, most especially in regards to the mindset, because surely the refugees, with the problems that youth refugees do have, enrolling them into the entrepreneurship journey and also the business development, which really needs courage as well as resilience, has not always been a piece of cake. So it has not been easy, because most especially when it comes to the time frame. I will speak about the time frame. Like, for example, when we were beginning Unleashed, we had the first stage of our program taking 3 months. And then we came to realize that before the 3-month end, we have lost at least a half of the scholars who are given scholarships because they simply gave up about the program. And also, of course, also the challenge of mindset. It has always been ideally quite challenging, most especially to bring in the aspect of how would refugees think of not showing off vulnerability, but rather taking the challenges and turning them into solutions. It has been quite challenging. So how we overcome this is that into our empowerment, we deal with that. So we have different courses, different trainings that we have designed specifically to reduce or to solve the challenge. On mindset shift, we have also on professional growth, like overcoming limiting beliefs, comfort zone challenges. So we put these ones all together, then we can go on the professional part. So we think to have great entrepreneurs and great innovators and business people in the refugee context, then it is very important to first deal with the mindset, to first deal with the personal development of an individual. So, and this is what we are doing.
I appreciate it, Amani. Martha, let's go to you.
Okay, I agree with you that you can't just say to people, we want to change your mindset. What we're seeing is that the mindset shift occurs around a very practical process of people designing and building a solution, like a technology or a tool. And that going through the process of building that, getting feedback, refining it, and then using that to earn money is what creates the mind shifts set. So we're talking about really basing that mindset on, something very concrete and hands-on.
Yeah, and Amy, I see your hand, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment because I feel like if we're, more and more, I've come to realize that when you want to make long-term change in any situation, you have to look at transformation on many levels. There's the individual transformation, there's community level transformation, there's systemic transformation, there's institutional transformation. And I think that if you don't have that personal transformation where someone goes from dependency to agency, then I feel that any sorts of long-term gains that you want to make are going to just slide back again. And one of the things I often say that we've gotten really good at scaling dependency, and what we have to look at now is scaling independence and agency, and that comes on that has to happen, I think, on both the individual level and on the systemic level. And if we don't look at all of those levels, then I think that we'll never have true success in this area. And what I also want to just say is we won't do it all. Amani does, we do stuff on the individual basis because that's what we do well. Other people will work on a community basis, an institutional basis, a policy basis, because that's what they do well. But to think that one small agency or organization can cover that whole spectrum, of course, that's not realistic, but if we're part of an ecosystem that's working together to do that transformation, that's where the magic happens. So I just wanted to mention that because I personally think the transformation that we see when, a woman who's never held a tool before in her life, all of a sudden makes a technology that saves her 100 hours of labor every year, that kind of transformation is stunning. And it's what lays the groundwork for her then working, doing extension work in her community, becoming an activist, starting an organization, etc. So I think all of these things are important threads to an approach which has to be multi-pronged.
One of the tremendous value of this event for me is learning new concepts that point to new directions. And the concept that I learned from you, Amy, is scaling independence. It is worse further south. Thank you for that. And you know what? Let's riff a little bit because I see a hand raised from the audience, Mugisha. Why don't we, it looks like, Mugisha, you're raising your hand in relation to this discussion. Why don't you come live?
Yeah, after I've raised my hand because I work in a refugee setup, and I really like the question you raised about empowering refugees who are the people with trauma. How do we lead them to entrepreneurship? I am a guy who is working in education. Actually, I trust that change is possible, and it is possible from people hearing what is hindering them and how they could change, how they could turn over a new leaf. So what I try to do in my education programs, like right now, I'm using art to solve mental health. Get people together, they start working on different designs. As they are having conversation together, it gets their attention and they start brainstorming ideas that can even shock the world.
Mugesha, this is awesome. Also tell us where you're joining us from and the name of your organization.
I'm joining from the same refugee settlement with Joel Amani. My organization is called Success Roads.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Welcome, welcome. Great to have you here. And this discussion really sets up the next question, which is for Belinda and Kim. And the question is, you talked about mentorship. And the moment, Belinda, you said mentorship, I said, uh-oh, not scalable. And Kim, you said, you know, customized bundle of services. And I said, costly. So my question to you both is, how can you scale up this work? And B, are there ways to make this work financially sustainable so that you don't have to be dependent on this hamster wheel of constantly being in fundraising mode, which is so common in humanitarian work? So Belinda, let's start with you.
Thank you so much. I was just, you caught me when I was still thinking about the previous thought about, is it possible to change lives when, you know, you have a lot of trauma bundled up with experiences that the populations you're serving have. And one of the things, I agree with everything that everyone said, and all along was like, do we have an option? We are actually in a season where there are not so many options, if not self-reliance, dwindling aid, protracted displacement. We just have to kind of all come together and believe in resilience and the human, you know, need to actually be better, be self-reliant, I think. So you just caught me when I was thinking and digesting all the thoughts from the rest of the panelists and Mugesha there. In terms of mentorships, and like I said, we are in the beginnings of this research. And that is one of the premise we wanted to see, or we're looking to see, can this be scalable? And what is the calibration of this mentorship journey that can actually be used to go into scale, not just by the humanitarian or the development sector, but also with other agencies, government, local governments, but within the community itself. And so that's where we're trying to look at, if you actually leave the classroom where you need to have a class of 30 people, 40 people sitting down, going through entrepreneurship training that is actually very costly, may take a couple of days, a couple of weeks, and then may need a lot of refreshers going on over time. Can you actually bring this to live within the community? And so the mentorship we're looking at here is not having a professional mentor, but actually using people who live and operate in the same community as the populations we're serving, and having refugees themselves, host community members, elect themselves as mentors, because they have the profile you're working with here is anyone who's run a business between anytime, let's say 3 years and above, which is really many people. This is your local shopkeeper, your local barber, your local tailor. They come on board and actually agree to mentor someone who lives in the same community. We're working on things like proximity. Maybe they just need to be within the same neighborhood, and maybe they just need to meet in each other's businesses, you know, and calibrating this mentorship in a way that it can actually be within the community and with very little support, for instance, from external factors, so that it can take a life of its own. And looking at how now, even if support is required from agencies like the IRC and other agencies, it could just be to set up or to nurture the relationships in the community and see how that they run. We've had instances where our mentorship program runs for about 6 months. In the pilots that we've run, we've actually found that people ended up calling each other friends and family, meeting beyond the 6 months that we prescribed them to meet, meeting more than we had intended them to meet, making each other business partners and all that. So we do see a promise where if we get the right calibration and we actually nest this within the community, it can actually be something that's really scalable and takes the energy from the community.
Belinda, thank you. And Kim, before going to you, I want to ask another question to really push this discussion, because there is a lot of talk about mentorship and very few definitions of it. And David Munir Napti, thank you for your comment. You're saying that mentorship is definitely scalable because there are billions of people in the world, meaning there are billions of mentors. However, by saying this, and by saying what you're saying, Belinda, that you see peer-to-peer communication, mentoring, we are equating mentorship with peer-to-peer communication and advice. But what if mentorship is the passing down of expertise? Imagine if MIT was all about mentorship, we didn't have professors and the students were just teaching each other. I assure you, MIT would not be the same place, right? So if we define mentorship as a passing down of reliable, verified expert knowledge, mentorship is very unscalable. What do you say to that?
It's a great question. Scalability is, of course, at the heart of like the driving force of what we're trying to understand as well. I would say a couple of things. First is the model of mentorship that Belinda described in Rebuild. Part of what we're trying to figure out are piloting different types of mentorship: one-on-one peer mentorship, group mentorship, 3-on-1 with one experienced private sector partner with 3 mentors. But in other programming outside of Rebuild, we've looked at it at taking a bit more of a network approach. So in Kenya, for example, we've brought together women who are all entrepreneurs in a community to come together in groups between 10 and 15 and share that experience, just like you're saying. So I think there are different ways of thinking about this. We don't have to consider mentorship just a one-on-one meeting, which of course doesn't sound very scalable. But I just want to respond to your original question as well on scalability and the cost with livelihoods programming. We know that that is feedback that we hear from the community. I think one important thing to realize is that in IRC's case, the biggest chunk of the most expensive element of our bundle of services is cash that goes directly to refugee clients or directly to host communities. So that is the most cost, the biggest cost driver for us, and it's going directly to the client to help them, enable them to really kickstart a business or to expand a business that already exists. So when you think about it that way, I think it's a little bit easier to swallow the cost, but it certainly doesn't make it easily scalable. And so I think the way we're thinking about this is twofold. First is we don't want IRC, of course, to be the only implementer of a bundled service. That's really only possible to expand and to be scalable with really strong community partnerships. And so what we've done in our work is to share the livelihood center model, our bundle of service model, with refugee-led organizations, with Nairobi City Council and KCCA in Kampala to help, city government and RLOs and other community-based organizations to use the model as well. And then on the financial side, while business grants are really impactful for clients in the immediate term, having them connected to financial services in the long term, and then working with those financial service providers to design financial products that are made for refugees that help unlock some of the barriers that refugees specifically face is also critically important. And so IRC is doing some innovative work with financial service providers to do just that. So those are, there's not a perfect answer. If I had a perfect answer, we wouldn't be having this panel, but that's some of how we think about scalability.
Well, I think your kind of work teaches us that the world is a very imperfect place, and yet we must persist and try to make it better. And so in this regard, we have a question from one of the audience members, from Scott. Scott, are you comfortable to come live and offer a question? Because I truly think your question is fantastic and it's right in line with this discussion.
Yeah, are you guys able to hear me?
Yeah, perfect, please.
Yeah, so we have some experience as an organization with a mentorship program in Uganda, actually not too far from Nakivale. we experienced a pretty high level of hesitancy, reticence on the part of local business leaders to really pour into it. So this idea of mentorship that we've experienced often in the United States, it needed to look different. And I'm just curious if any of you have experienced that same hesitancy with host community mentors and how you overcome it.
Belinda, I saw you coming live. Would you like to offer a response to this question? And while Belinda is joining us, oh, there you are. Well, while Belinda is joining us, I see Simon that you joined us. I finally see you. Are you able to hear us, and are you able to come live as well?
Hi, Erdin.
Yes, Belinda, please.
So sorry.
Would you like to address Scott's question?
I could, yes. So sorry about that minimal technical glitch. So that is very valid. And one of the questions we've been asking ourselves as we designed the mentorship approach was, for me as a mentee, someone who's going to gain from this journey, there is clear cause for me to be willing to participate. But what does the mentor stand to gain? And especially host community mentors. And so those are part of the things that we've been trying to even ask the community itself, what would actually be a good incentive for you to participate. One of the things that we've really been pleasantly surprised about is how the host community has been very altruistic in how they approached it or how they understood it. One of the things we had to actually talk to the community about is the existence of refugees. And we found out that, not surprising, many of the mentors, host community mentors, were not aware of exactly how refugees came into the community. If they existed, they actually did business within the community. So these are part of the pieces of putting together where we're actually educating the community about the existence of refugees and the value they bring to the economy as well, and to talk about aspects of social cohesion and actually how that actually brings shared winning, if I can call it that. But the host communities, after the mentorship, when we spoke to them, they were very happy to have actually helped a fellow a human being and a resident in their community. So we found that there wasn't very, at least in the pilots, and you're working with very small samples here before we go into the full RCT, that the willingness from the host community is very strong. And when we appeal to altruism and talking about this is your neighbor, and if they're well off, then you also become, it's a benefit to you. They're also looking at ways to incentivize that. And so we have situations where we have certain aspects where we're bringing shared perspectives. Before the mentorship journey starts, we talk about different backgrounds that have brought everyone to that table, from if it's a refugee, from the journey to being a refugee and their life in Kampala, same thing for the host community members. And then we also look at ways to incentivize that engagement, where we have still deliberating how to calibrate that and perfectly design, but ways that both the host community and the refugee participants can actually win in this journey, whether it's starting a business together, whether it's actually having a shared goal that they can all gain from. Yeah.
Thank you, Belinda. I want to start shifting to Amy, because one of the questions I want to ask her is one of how do you scale up the prototypes that are being developed as part of your program. But, you know, Scott and Belinda began a very important discussion, which is, you know, in many countries, refugees are not welcome guests. Let's recognize this reality. It's a very unfortunate reality. They find themselves needing to find safe haven in a new country that doesn't exactly welcome them. And when we train them entrepreneurship education, you know, they find themselves in this often unwelcome environment. They need to find partners, investors, supporters, right? That's very, very challenging. And Amy, first, if you could speak to, you know, do you run into those situations? How do you navigate that situation. And then I'd like to ask you about the scale up of prototypes. Amy, would you like to come live?
Sure. I would say that for the most part, a lot of our foundational work has been in Uganda, where that situation is not as severe. So there may be a little bit of resentment by a host community about the amount of resources that are available to refugees, but in general, I think that it's a very open environment. Other work that we've done has been with internally displaced populations in South Sudan. So again, obviously you don't have those situations, but we're about to explore doing this work in Kutupalong in Bangladesh, and that is a huge issue. So we are, more than we normally do, we're engaging a much wider array of humanitarian actors, of policymakers, of people who can really explore that challenging landscape and look at ways that it might be able to, for example, if you can do entrepreneurship, which promotes healthcare, right? Perhaps people are making bandages. Then you're still promoting entrepreneurship, but you're doing it in a way that promotes services within the camp, within the situation. So I think that it requires a different type of thinking than when you have a situation like Uganda, where people are pretty much free to work, where there's a thriving market, or several thriving markets in Rhino Camp, where people are, essentially encouraged to have businesses and to promote, and entrepreneurship is encouraged. So I do think that it depends a lot on the context, and it's a more challenging journey if you have to navigate those pitfalls. And maybe what I'll do is, before answering the second question, just leave it for other people with more experience in those challenging situations to chime in with their thoughts on that question, because I think it's a really rich question, and then we can go back to scaling prototypes afterwards.
That sounds great. Anyone would like to offer a perspective on this question? And really feel free to come live. We are in a discussion. And, in MIT classroom style, you know what? I'm going to cold call. Divyani Zapata, I see you making a comment in agreement that this issue exists. So I will ask you to come live. But first, we have a hand from Aleph. Please join us. Are you able to come live? Aleph Hashimne?
Yes, thank you very much. Super happy to be part of this conversation. So I work with the African Entrepreneur Collective, and we run an entrepreneurship program in Rwanda, Kenya, and Ethiopia. So part of the challenges a colleague asked, if you're training and consulting and providing investment, how is that then sustainable? In principle, one of the reasons why we expand to one country versus another is are they signatory to the Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework. So that is at least one checklist that we do. And then when we move on to the implementation level, it's different from country to country. As Amy said, it's relatively easy in Rwanda to do business as a refugee. You can move freely from one camp to another or come to the city. It's relatively not the same in Ethiopia and Kenya. However, entrepreneurship, because most of the businesses that we serve deal with trades of basic needs. So it's really retail of what a camp as big as Kakuma, which hosts more than 200,000 refugees, has a daily need of basic needs. It's a consumer market. So when we offer training and consulting, and we also offer investment, the immediate need is within the community and their host community. And as a collective, we also weigh in with other organizations to how much advocacy can be done for free movement, free access to resources. So I would say it's a step towards dignity. It has challenges, but I think it's way sustainable instead of doing nothing about a situation that exists. Yeah.
Oh, Aleph, thank you for this comment. I'm assuming, but let me clarify, you're joining us from Rwanda, am I correct?
Yes, I'm joining from Rwanda, and we have operations in the 3 countries.
That's great. It's great to have you here. I love your concept of host community because it reframes the discussion from nation, native, which often creates divisions between us. But if you're a host community, the focus becomes on hospitality. And I believe this is what we need to nurture. Now, let me shift back to Amy. And Malesi, I see your hand. I will come back to you. But we need to talk about scale up. And Amy, if I could offer a very brief personal example about why I was moved by your pictures of the prototypes. In my teenage years, I was an intern with a number of NGOs in Kyrgyzstan. And it was the early 90s in Kyrgyzstan. Many NGOs came from other countries. And so we would go around village to village, basically telling people that they're poor. It's like, you are poor, you need help. And there were a lot of people who said, wait a second, I never thought I was poor. And you talked about the building of the mindset of dependency. And I really disliked what was happening. I didn't like that mindset change. And that's why I actually got out of that NGO work and took me into a very different direction. And so seeing your prototypes, I said, this is the way forward. But as you see also from the chat, one of the questions asked, well, to scale this up needs financial support, legal support. How do you do that?
Sure, and of course it takes support, right? I think that we, the environment in which these entrepreneurs are trying to succeed is challenging, and to say you have to do it with no support, when in the US, where we have a very favorable environment, there are all these things that all these resources to support entrepreneurs. So I think it's important to recognize, first of all, yes, support is needed. And then the second thing, though, is to recognize what is the most effective support that can be provided. And I'm really eager to hear the end results of the research that Belinda and Kimberly are doing, because, is it cash? Is it in kind? Is it mentorship? Is it design training? There are all these different aspects. And I think there's a lot of us who are trying to build that evidence base so that we can be more effective in the type of support that we do. One of the things that we did in our recent co-creation summit is we asked people to really think of the different ways in which their prototype could provide value to different segments. So to users, to businesses, to NGOs, et cetera, because scaling has to happen in a way where resources are possible. So for example, that groundnut roaster is rather expensive. I mean, it's probably $40 to $50 when you do the conversion. So that's not a huge amount of money, but most refugees wouldn't have that money. So in order to scale the impact of that, right, most likely they would be, the entrepreneurs would be selling the business of roasting groundnuts, not the actual product. So first of all, thinking about what's your most successful business opportunity, but then how can you replicate that? Right? It's not that you necessarily should have a single factory that's roasting all the groundnuts that are being produced in the settlement, but rather you might have, dozens of small entrepreneurs doing this same thing. So then you might partner with a livelihood NGO, which is trying to promote these livelihood opportunities, and that they might like to have a suite of technologies that were developed by the refugees and the host community members at these design trainings that they could then speak to, that they could select from to promote livelihoods in a wide area. So I think you have to be creative in the way that you think about scale, and that you think about whether you're talking about expansion or replication. But there's no question that it requires an investment. But I think that it's a wise investment to make, and we could review a lot of other investments that are being made in the humanitarian sector, and perhaps when we have a good evidence base, point to why certain of these things are fundamentally important in terms of that long-term transformation. I do see that Martha raised her hands, and frequently she will say things that I know perfectly well and forget to mention, or her own thoughts on it. So can I just ask her to finish our answer and then we can
Absolutely.
move on? Yeah, thanks. Martha, unmute yourself again.
Sorry, one thing I think about when we think about scaling is how do we scale kind of a diverse ecosystem of different livelihood models? Because the idea of, okay, we scale a lot of technologies and we're just creating all of these micro enterprises or small business, that's not sustainable either. I think we also have to put more thought into different kinds of livelihood earning models. And I was interested in what Belinda was saying about how they were bringing people together and you doing this sort of common mentorship. And I think that way you can build networks of businesses, but also you can build different kinds of businesses where you have groups of people working together. And I think that's something that we need to explore more in our work.
And just a final thought, if it's okay, is, education is also something that's difficult to scale, right? You need teachers, you need schools, you need infrastructure, sometimes you need meals for the children, but we invest in it because we think it's important. So, so it could be that it's a mindset shift at multiple levels.
The word that I really appreciated hearing from you is creativity. And that's what makes this work exciting. One has to acknowledge that a lot of entrepreneurship work today is really not very creative. A lot of it is driven by how Silicon Valley thinks about entrepreneurship, breakthrough technology, lots of funding, massive scale, break rules. Well, obviously, in our context, that's not going to work. And I'm very excited we will generate new mindset, new solutions, new paradigms. And this is one of the reasons this work is important. Now, Kim, I see your hand. Why don't I first go to Malaysia, who's been waiting, and then maybe you can also build on Malaysia's comment and the previous ones. Is that okay with you? Malaysia, please. Malaysia, are you able to unmute?
Yes, please.
Fantastic. Great to have you.
Away from South Sudan, Juba.
Malaysia, you're muted again.
Yeah. You're getting me?
Yes, this is good.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm very grateful for this innovative program. I'm joining right away from South Sudan, Juba. So this program for mentorship, I'll just talk about because this is something that is really needed as our program is concerned in South Sudan. Looking at entrepreneurship, there are a lot of factors that are really hindering the activities when it comes to entrepreneurship mind of the people. Because in our country, as for now, is one of the sensitive issues and which is affecting our move towards entrepreneurship mentorship. And issues also concerning cultural base, we talk about unique dignities and other factors that may not participate actively to their activities, which is really affecting the program. But I'll be very happy to hear that all the time, us working together, seeing how best we can do this for the future of our country. Thank you.
And Malaysia, I'm sorry to ask you this, but the hearing was difficult just for a moment. Can you please summarize your main point, because it's important to engage with it?
Yeah.
And I apologize to ask you again.
Yeah. Okay. I said once more, thank you so much. I'm very glad to join the program. So I'm from Juba, South Sudan, Juba.
And you offered an important thought about mentorship. Can you please summarize it again?
Now, we are talking about issues of mentorship. I think it's very good, like, yeah. So what I'm trying to say is, like, when it comes to entrepreneurship, like a special issues of mentorship in entrepreneurship, as for now in South Sudan, this is one of the biggest challenges, whereby like entrepreneurship, if you have to look, gender issue is one of the key, because now, like people doing things, they say, yeah, this is not supposed to be done. Our operation in South Sudan, and to entrepreneurship mind, like we can stand for ourselves and we do something that makes our community is really economically developed. Thank you so much for this.
Yeah, Melissa, this is great. I think I got it. The point that you're raising.
Thank you.
We need to make the discussion of entrepreneurship education more specific in this context, because gender influences someone's ability to participate in that. Yeah. This is what I'm hearing. Yeah. Now, Kim, may I bring you back and want to hear from you, and let's see how you build on the previous comments.
Sure. I mean, I think women's economic empowerment and gender specific challenges and constraints is hugely important. And so it's really important to adapt curriculum that really focuses on those challenges that women face specifically.
That's not good, you know.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt.
Please continue, Kim.
Okay, great. So I would say having curricula that speaks specifically to gender constraints, challenges that women face in balancing responsibilities at home, for example, as well as working. One way IRC tackles this is through a programmatic approach called EASE, Economic and Social Empowerment, in conjunction with business skills and informal financial support. We also conduct gender discussion groups with husbands and spouses or other male household members to talk about use of income and control of resources in a household to sort of help tackle some of the challenging social norms that women entrepreneurs face. And so I think it's important to support them not only in the entrepreneurship context, but also at home and in that sort of wider environment. So yeah, we totally agree with that. I also just wanted to build on Martha's comment earlier about taking creative approaches. And I agree that, you know, standard entrepreneurship training is not the only way we have to go about this type of support. One thing that we're also looking at within the Rebuild project in Kenya and Uganda is to identify specific value chains where there's lots of opportunity for refugee employment. So we're looking specifically at targeting beauty and cosmetics in Nairobi, as well as clothing and textile in Kampala. And we've partnered with specific private sector companies who have said they're interested in employing refugees in a variety of different ways. Some it's directly within their company, with others it's helping them become wholesalers, for examples, for products. So I think there's more that we can do with private sector partnership as well. And I think hopefully that also creates a bit more of a sustainable model too.
Thank you, Kim. Now, I want to transition to questions from our audience. But before we do that, let me summarize what I think we heard today. Number one, of course, this work is not easy, not going to be easy, but this is not the reason to get discouraged, but rather the reason to activate to a greater level. Number two, we need to think about long-term multidimensional change, because this is a long-term multidimensional problem. To be able to be successful in long-term multidimensional change, we need to pursue mindset change from dependency to agency. And this is why entrepreneurship education is important. And number three, we need to be creative. We need to be creative, in terms of how we think about mentorship and coaching. It's not just one-on-one, it's group, it's community-based, etc. So much more to innovate for us there. And number two, we've got to be creative about scalability and creative about how we build public-private, cross-border, cross-culture partnerships to attain that. This is what I'm hearing from the discussion today. This is personally very meaningful to me. And so by thanking the panelists, I would like to open the floor for discussion. Feel free to raise your hand, come live. I'm observing a lot of shyness, which is very strange. It's creating a true mental dissonance for me because I'm not seeing any shyness in the chat, and yet there is a lot of shyness in the video discussion. But that's okay. Jason, I see you making a comment in the chat in support of the idea that this is truly a complex, multidimensional problem. Would you like to come live or for a comment beyond that? Oh, Jason, I see you coming live. Please, the floor is yours. And then Yunus will go to you afterward.
Yeah, sure. I just, we run some helplines and media services to deliver information to the Venezuelan migrant population in Colombia. And so with that, like we're trying to connect to all the NGOs that have different services, all the government programs that have services, and pick out what's working. And with what we've seen is like there's a lot of different programs that they're kind of limiting their self by like the rigid structure of their solution. And because they don't necessarily have that like bundle of services that's been talked about and stuff where you really do need, like one little service has a hard time finding its mark because usually people's needs are more complex than one specific thing. I guess the main thing is like economic and entrepreneurial solutions. They really require a lot of thought for the specific population, how they can access information, their ability to actually go out and sell it, financial, how much money does it actually cost? Like, I've seen a lot of programs that offer trainings, but trainings that don't have a way to support yourself, then you just make their job harder in the meantime, because then they have to go work something else to try to support themselves while they're doing a solution, and it really takes away the focus of actually growing that solution. So just my thoughts.
I appreciate that. Belinda, Kim, would you be interested in addressing the points raised by Jason?
Go ahead, Belinda.
Jason, that was really gospel when he was saying, really, you can't take one small program that operates on its own and expect it to really have a strong mark and sustainable impact. And Jason, I think really he's spot on. He made me think about when we talk about scalability, that maybe we could actually be looking at it from, for sure we want to look at programs that can be taken up by other, ourselves or other agencies and implemented at a larger scale to reach out more people. But I was thinking, is there another way to actually look at the scalability concept where we can look at it from two-pronged pieces, where not every program should look at scaling in direct service delivery, but it can actually look at scalability as influence system change. Because if you influence change at a system level, whether it is at community perspectives, what we're trying to do with the mentorship, where we say a refugee is someone who lives with you, it's someone who can be your business partner, your customer, the person that you negotiate and work with. If we change community perspectives and perception at that level, and that actually changes and brings about catalytic change around how we perceive each other, and it changes the marketplace, how we interact with each other. I think that in itself is a scale angle that we can look at. If we change policy, for instance, that is also something that can affect the rest of the programs at a different level. So looking at scale, let's not just look at blowing up this programming and to have it replicated everywhere, but looking at how it can actually influence the landscape more. And the other way to actually look at it is also around the resources. If by generating evidence, you're able to figure out something doesn't work, of course, we try to find out what works and scale that. But if research, and for us at IRC and Rebo, we're very open to figure out things that don't work so that we can come in and stand on a podium and talk about that. then you're able to use the resources that we all say we have in limited durations to actually sharpen your programming. And for me, I still see that as contributing to scale, because then the things that work, we're able to put our resources there and scale that. So Jason, just maybe think about how we think about programming and the scale angle as well.
Jason, I see you raising your hand. I understand that's in response to Belinda, please, and then Yunus, you're on my mind.
Yeah, so absolutely. And one of the things about, I lost my train of thought here. Like not everything needs to actually be scaled, right? Sometimes it's only a piece of the puzzle. And so like when there's all these different pieces, sometimes it's better to actually network them and go with a coalition or an alliance or whatever it is, where everybody's like, if like, you think of like a market, right? You have one provider for the market if they're doing one product and that's their company. Well, that's not enough to necessarily bring people to like an actual market. Like whereas a market, like one of the like a value is that there's all these different providers that have all of these different things, and so like that grouping and ability to work together sometimes has its own value that can actually push whatever you're trying to do a lot more than trying to scale an initial. Not everybody wants to or should be a global success, because that's not everybody's goal and that's not what they want.
This is such an important point, because I think we as a community must find ways to very reasonably, constructively push back against dogmatic paradigms such as scale is a necessity. And you're right, we need to question that. So I appreciate this discussion. Yunus, I thank you for your patience. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I had another thought, but I will also add something to that discussion because I like that a lot. Because what I experience as well is that it never helps to get up and try to do something scalable in the first place, and it's a lot more helpful to be on the ground first and be on the ground level, talk to the people, and get a lot of information, get into the community and learn as much as you can. At least that has been the case for me, and then think in the second step of something scalable, because if you start the other way around, usually we get a kind of Silicon Valley illness where we design solutions for problems that doesn't exist. So I totally agree to the point of Jason that not everything needs to be scalable, and I think as well that it's good to start with something not scalable and then go ahead afterwards. Think about scalability in the second step. Thanks.
And Yunus, we didn't ask you, where are you joining us from?
Yeah, sure. I'm joining from Germany. I'm based in Germany. I've worked before in Malta, so we're a very tiny country, and that was quite easy to have a non-scalable solution. And based on the experience I had there working with NGOs, I created or started a social enterprise called Enterprise, and we are trying to build an online community for this kind of peer-to-peer advisory that you mentioned as well, between refugee founders and established entrepreneurs. Yeah, so we also started from something small, something not scalable, typical NGO work in the humanitarian sector, and then we went into something more scalable, where we are building upon experiences and interviews we had on the ground.
Folks, I have to say this has been in all of the 2 years on Zoom. This has been one of the best Zoom discussions that I've been in. And that's because this is the first time I'm seeing such an active stream post. You're posting your emails and the organizations you work for. I actually haven't seen this before. That was a very interesting observation for me personally, and I think it says something. It says that this discussion was really a springboard to future conversations and collaboration. So with that, I want to thank the panelists here. Thank you for bringing your perspectives, but most importantly, thank you for your sustained, continuous day-to-day work, because this is what truly makes a difference. And with that, I'm passing it back to Lana. Thank you for having us here, Lana.
Thank you so much. And I'm apologizing in advance for the background noise. I've got 2 little kids home with the flu. So we're all human here.
It's school vacation.
Right, and that as well here in the States. So I want to thank you again, Erdin, all of our panelists, all of you for joining this discussion. I think we're just scratching the tip of the iceberg here, but I think for us, there's some really exciting, themes and threads here that we would love to continue in our next session. So we hope you join us at our next session starting at 10:45. So we'll take a 15-minute break. And then we're doing an interactive design workshop on designing entrepreneurship support networks. So take a break, bring that energy to our next session, and let's roll up some sleeves and begin working on some of these ideas we're collecting here today. Thank you all for joining the Migration Summit. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.